Hey folks, welcome to another Passion for Sound audio review, and today we're taking a look at the Drop HiFiMan collaboration, the HE-R7DX. This is kind of a $149 headphone, and I say kind of because I've also seen it listed on Drop for $99, making it incredibly affordable. For that money, what you're getting is a closed back, dynamic driver headphone, and so I was really keen to see if it was any good, or if HiFiMan should stick to their planar game. Let's take a look at the R7DX and find out. The R7DX uses a 50mm driver on the inside here. It's a dynamic driver, as I mentioned in the intro, and it uses HiFiMan's topology diaphragm technology. What that basically means is that HiFiMan have come up with a way where they can design individual sections of the diaphragm to use different materials, different thicknesses, different contouring, textures, whatever they want to do basically, to better make the driver more resistant to breakup, which is when it starts to flex in ways that it's not meant to. They can work with the damping properties of the driver, the general frequency response of the driver, and any resonances. So there's lots of different things that the topology diaphragm is meant to fix, and certainly in my recent review of the RE800 IEMs, I was pretty impressed with the results. Whether that translates to a full-size 50mm driver, we'll wait and see in a moment. The other thing to know about the drivers in these is that they're a 16ohm driver, so they're pretty low impedance for a dynamic driver, and they're a 101 decibel sensitivity driver. What that all adds up to is that these are very easy to drive from, say, a PC, a tablet, a smartphone via something like a dongle if you need it, all the way through to full-sized, high-quality desktop units should you want to. Beyond those specs, talking about the rest of the design of the headphone, it's a pretty cheap-feeling headphone, but not in a bad way. For $149, assuming you're paying full price for it, I still think it stacks up from a design point of view, and you can definitely see that they've kept the price down by using existing parts that they already had rather than trying to design new stuff. And I'm completely okay with that because everything they've used is a good, solid choice. It's comfortable, it's sturdy, it's solid, there's absolutely no complaints. I know some people aren't a huge fan of the look of them. It's kind of grown on me though, I don't mind it too much. I like the kind of subtle blue-grey look. I think the old HE-4XX headbands are quite comfortable. They're maybe not the absolute best for long-term listening comfort over a few hours, but for an hour here or there, they're absolutely fine, and indeed they're as good as many other headphones, even for longer sessions. They're just not the very best out there, and that generally goes to leather suspension band headbands. The cups themselves are a combination of what we've seen before on headphones like the Dava and the Dava Pro, but on this occasion we've got this shell over the back of the headphone to make it a closed headphone. The pads are basically identical to the Dava pads as well, and that's a good thing too. You've got leather on the outer and inner edges, but you've got a fabric section where it touches the skin. So they're comfortable, they don't get sweaty or overly hot, but they still give you a good seal and are nice and comfortable too. The final thing to mention about the design of these is that they've got a twin cable entry on the bottom. They come with a very basic but decent cable. It's a big upgrade from some of the old HiFiMan cables. And so that's a twin entry 3.5mm cable, meaning that you can run these balanced if you want to. If you pick up something like a cable from Heart Audio or maybe an Apos Flow cable, you can run these balanced out of anything you want. And so for $149, there's really nothing to complain about in terms of the design of these. And so it really all comes down to how they sound. I often get asked for recommendations on the channel for specific products at specific price points. And so what I've done to help is produce this database. If you take a look at the description box in any of my videos, you'll find a section that says Passion for Sound Recommends. You might need to click the More button to see it, but it's always in the description. Clicking on the Passion for Sounds Recommends link will take you through to this database and give you a chance to see all of the different products that I've recommended over the years. The Airtable database contains a heap of information, but so that it's not overwhelming, I've set it up in such a way that you can filter it to look at just the sorts of products you're looking for. Let's say you're looking for a headphone, you can select that in the filter list and see all of the headphones that I recommend ordered by price from lowest to highest. You can also use the filter and sort buttons in different ways to better suit your searching needs, so feel free to play around with it as much as you like, it won't affect what other people can see. The idea was to make a resource for you that allows you to quickly and easily find the types of products at the budget that you're looking for. Once you've found products that you're interested in, you'll also notice that there's links next to each of the products that will take you to various retailers and manufacturers. So you might find links to places like Apos Audio in USA and Canada, or Amazon links to the USA, Australia, Canada and the UK, or global links to places like Massdrop, Linsol, HiFiGo, or the manufacturers themselves such as Virum Audio, Jashelli Labs and ZMF Headphones. Some of these links are affiliate links, but certainly not all of them, and it's definitely not a criteria to get on this list. These are just products that I recommend, and whilst your support via affiliate links is always appreciated, it's absolutely not expected and also does not influence whether a product makes it onto this list. The list is always evolving, growing and changing, so do check back regularly if you're looking for something new, and I hope you find this a useful resource. For now though, let's get back to the review. The first thing I noticed when listening to the R7DX in isolation, meaning I wasn't comparing them with anything else at the time, was they've got a great sense of clarity to them. They're a very clean, very transparent sounding headphone for the price. Tonally, they lean a little bit brighter than neutral, they've got a little bit of treble emphasis, and so that does mean that their tonal accuracy is what I would describe as only moderately accurate. They do shift things just a little bit towards the treble from an overall tonal balance, but they're not at all bad in that respect, and it actually makes them a great match for a lot of orchestral and classical music. The soundstage they produce is decent, but not really special. Not that I would expect it to be at 149, it's about what I expect and it's completely acceptable. Interestingly, despite what I said about them being a treble-leaning headphone, they do also have very good bass extension. So the bass quantity is probably less than I think is natural and neutral, but the sense of extension of that bass is very, very good for a $149 headphone. They don't give me quite the same sense of depth and rumble as the recently reviewed Sivka SV023, that was a real standout, but the R7DX is absolutely nothing to complain about. It's just that the quantity of bass is a bit lower than I'd prefer. One thing that is worth noting, both if you're watching other reviews or reading other reviews, and also if you try these for yourself, is that I found that the amount of clamp force provided does significantly change the bass response. They're not a particularly clampy headphone on my head, but what I found was that if I put just a tiny bit of pressure on the cups, the bass presence did lift quite significantly. So do keep that in mind if your head is wider than mine is, not that we're going to be able to know that because I've got no measurements of my head, but if you know yourself to have a wider head than the average, or if you know that a particular reviewer that you've been reading or watching has said in the past that their head is wider and that clamp force is an issue for them, what that means is that those that are getting more clamp, so those with a larger or wider head, they're going to be getting more bass and may describe this headphone a little bit differently. For me, where the clamping was only moderate, maybe slightly less than the average, what I found was the bass was just a little bit below the quantity I wanted, but the quality was still there. So keep that in mind if you're checking it out, and certainly if you want more bass, I imagine you could tweak and bend the headband just to increase the clamp force a little bit. But ultimately the takeaway from all that I've just said is that the HE-R7DX is a very, very good sounding headphone when considered in isolation and considered at its price. It doesn't really set the world on fire in any particular way, but it's a really good, solid, clarity-focused headphone with a bit of a treble, slightly brighter than neutral leaning. And so as always, my next question was how does it stack up? One of the first and most obvious comparisons in my collection was the HiFiMan HE-R7DX SE. These have very similar retail prices, with the key differences being that one is dynamic, being the R7DX, versus planar in the HE-R7DX SE, and that of course the HE-R7DX SE is also open back versus closed back. Putting the two on side by side and running through a bunch of different tracks, one of the tracks that I chose to make notes on was Sin 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 by Robbie Williams. Listening via the R7DX, the sound was clean and crisp, but not particularly engaging. When the bass kicks in at about the 1 minute 40 mark in this track, the R7DX just didn't have the punch and the drive to really give the track the rhythm it needed. Overall, the sound was nice, but it was fairly unremarkable and clearly a bit treble focused, as I've already discussed. Going over to the HE-R7DX SE, the first thing that's worth mentioning is it does require significantly more volume to achieve the same loudness levels as the R7DX. Once you get past that hurdle though, I do feel like the HE-R7DX SE has a slightly greater sense of transparency. In other words, I could hear a bit more sense of detail and resolution. I could hear through the music a bit more from the HE-R7DX SE, but they're not perfect either. The HE-R7DX SE is also a slightly treble focused tuning that lacks a bit of bass quantity for my tastes, and there are actually a lot of similarities in the overall tuning and tonality of both headphones. The fact that one's a planar and one's a dynamic means that the end result does still sound quite different, but tonally they're quite similar in terms of their leaning towards treble and their slight lack of bass quantity. For me, I think the dynamic driver in the R7DX is giving a more natural sense of timbre and general tonality and character to the music, but it's coming at the trade-off where I think the HE-400 SE, whilst not sounding quite as natural, I think it does deliver a slightly better sense of transparency and clarity and detail. So you could say that technically the HE-400 SE is a little bit stronger, but tonally and from a naturality point of view, I think the R7DX is a bit stronger. For that $149 odd price tag, I don't think you can really go wrong with either, but neither was really blowing my mind in this comparison either. If I had to choose between the two, I might just lean towards the R7DX, but it's a pretty close call. And so I reached for another comparable headphone that's a closed back again this time, it's also dynamic, and it's around the same price, and that's the BLON B60. I reviewed the BLON B60 some time ago, putting it up next to things like the Meza 99 Neo and also the Sivka SV021. The B60 never really wowed me in that review, I don't dislike it, but it's not a headphone I'm a huge fan of. And putting it up next to the R7DX, what I heard was that the B60 pushes even further into that treble and clarity focused tuning. Listening to Money by Prince, the R7DX was once again lacking a bit of that bass and therefore lacking a bit of groove, but it was still nice and clean and crisp, so not a bad listen overall. I did feel like the R7DX was just a little bit too forward on some of the treble and some of the vocals. But then when I went to the B60, that went even further. In some ways, it's interesting because it drew me right into Prince's vocals and had me focusing entirely on the quality and the texture of the vocal. But then when I stepped back and listened to everything else was completely unbalanced. That doesn't mean it was bad to listen to, but if you're listening to it from the point of view of does this sound natural, it definitely doesn't from the B60, whereas the R7DX stays closer to neutral and closer to natural. From the B60, there's even less bass than the R7DX. And again, when I took that step back and tried to think about it in terms of how does this translate to a live performance and what I'd expect to hear if I was in the room with the musicians, what I heard from the B60 was a slightly plasticky tonality. And that's going to come largely from the overemphasis of the wrong frequencies, and it could also be a case that it's only going to happen on some tracks, but the excessive focus on the upper frequencies from the B60 just has a tendency to push the tonality too far. The B60 is still an interesting headphone to listen to, and it's amazing that with such a wonky looking tuning, it actually sounds quite good. But if you are looking for something that's more natural, more honest, and is going to be more flexible across a wide range of genres, the R7DX to me has the B60 beaten hands down. It does a lot of what the B60 does, but not quite as extremely, and that allows it to be more versatile across different genres, different source devices, and probably for more people's tastes. And so with that in mind, I gave the R7DX its toughest battle yet, and that was to put it up against the also recently reviewed Rode NTH-100. If you haven't seen my review of the NTH-100 and you're in the market for an affordable closed-back headphone, you should absolutely go and check that one out after this one. I absolutely adore the NTH-100 and I expected an absolute walkover between the NTH-100 and the R7DX, but that wasn't quite what happened. One of the tracks I used for this test was Saturday Night's Alright for Fighting by Elton John, and as is becoming a bit of a theme, with a high energy track like that, the R7DX once again didn't really draw me in. There was too much emphasis on things like the snare and the cymbals and not enough on the bass. And so it was a bit distracting focusing me on things like snares and cymbals, and there wasn't enough groove in the track. Jumping over to the NTH-100, which I expected just to run away with this, and what I heard was that the bass was clearly and definitely better, but the most striking thing was that the NTH-100 comparatively sounded so much more closed in. Listening from the NTH-100 was like being in a room with the music being played on a decent hi-fi system. Listening from the R7DX was more like being in a large open-air venue with the music being played through a good PA system. And I don't mean that it's got this massive open-air style soundstage, but it definitely sounds more open and more spacious than something like the NTH-100. Flicking back and forth between the two headphones across a wide range of music, and whilst I do absolutely love and continue to love the NTH-100, I was shocked at just how well the R7DX held its own. It's not a headphone that's exactly to my personal tastes, but it's a headphone that I think is done incredibly well at the price. It definitely lacks bass quantity for me, but the quality is there, and across the board, everything is delivered with a nice sense of clarity, transparency, and detail. The sense of openness and spaciousness for a closed-back headphone is also excellent, and so if you prefer a slightly more neutral, slightly treble-leaning sound that's done well, then I think the R7DX is a fantastic choice. Having held its own against the insanely good NTH-100, I've got massive respect for the R7DX, and I've even played around with it as a work tool for editing videos, and it works perfectly well as both an editing and mixing and mastering type tool, as well as for a general music listening headphone. And particularly for music like classical, as I mentioned before. I generally find that classical, orchestral, soundtrack type music tends to actually work better, at least for me, on a slightly brighter tuned headphone. It brings out a little bit more of the texture and the clarity, and also tends to give you a better sense of space, which is good for an expansive sound like an orchestra. The NTH-100, on the other hand, I prefer for pop, rock, blues, electronic, anything like that, but it is a more closed-in presentation, and that's where I think both headphones absolutely have their place. And so if you're in the market for a very affordable closed-back headphone, I think the NTH-100 and the R7DX should be A and B on your list, and I'm not saying in which order because it's going to depend on your tastes. The Rode NTH-100 is clearly the better built headphone, but in terms of pure sound quality, I think they're absolutely neck and neck with just different sounds. And so as I said before, if you're in the market for a headphone like this, do check out the NTH-100 review, and once you know which one you want to buy, there'll be links in the descriptions of this video and also the NTH-100 video where you can pick up whichever one suits you. As always, I hope you found the review useful and helpful. If you have, I'd love it if you'd hit the like button and consider subscribing and ringing the notification bell if you haven't already. For now though, let me leave it to the music, so happy listening, and I'll see you here next time on Passion for Sound.